then, but we didn't have enough votes. And at that time, it was a way more expensive project as far as the bonds were concerned. So this is a way better deal as far as paying back the bond. So anyway, I don't want to say, I just thank you for everybody being here, and I hope everybody supports our.
Mark, it's up to you.
All right.
And your experts.
Who's laughing? Thanks for being here. It's a nice turnout. I appreciate everybody here. For those who don't know me, my name's Mark Wallace. I am your city administrator. I've been here since '01, working for the city. Started out in the utilities, digging in the streets. You probably saw me in the ditches. And I know Richard seen me in some ditches in his backyard. Took over Public Works for a few years and then worked my way all the way down to city administrator.
Way down.
Anyway, this is the plan the mayor spoke of. I'm sure that everybody's interested in what it's going to cost them right off the bat here, so we'll talk a little bit about that. According to this street obligation bond, the average Herman home value of $100,000 is assessed at $19,000. It'd be an annual increase of $123.50, which is $10.29 a month. And I think somewhere it says it's like 35 cents a day. We'll go over here just for a minute and see. I'll show you where our tax levy is. This is a very professionally done chart by our city clerk.
Hey, I thank you.
You did, thank you very much. Anyway, I'm going to give her credit for this. Here you see the city and the tax levy. You see the city of Gasconade, for some reason, has almost $2.70 per $100 assessed valuation. Owensville comes in second at $1.39. Land. Montgomery City at 95 cents. New Haven 88. New Florence 83. Morrison 55 cents. Rosebud 43. And Herman currently is at 38 cents. What does that bring in, Trish, the 38 cents? And do you know?
About $140,000.
$140,000 a year in taxes.
Well, let me give you the exact number here. $156,458.
And change?
Yes.
Okay. With this proposed increase for the street bond issue, would put us at just over $1, which would put us about in the middle between, it's like Bland and Montgomery City. So we're not at the top, we're not at the bottom, we're kind of in the middle where we should be, I think. Now how the bonds get paid. I might talk to Joey a little bit about this. Joey is the expert, but my understanding is we draw down in a 4-year period, we draw $1 million, I think this is actually $1,030,000 the first year. We pay that down in 4 years and we're debt free. We start over another 4 years, we borrow because of the assessed valuation growth, which we have at 2%, which is probably more like 4%, I believe, is the average. Anyway, here we'll do it again, we'll draw another little over $1 million and pay it back in 4 years. And the sweet part of this is at any time during this period that we say we're done, and we pay them off and we're done, we don't owe anymore. That's it. So it gives us some flexibility, it gives us approximately, well, here you see the annual payment. But in 4 years, we can do a lot of streets, do a lot of good with $1,030,000 on down the line. So at the end of it all, the most we'll ever be in debt, I believe, at one time, is that on here somewhere?
$1,525,000. The very bottom, last there.
Yeah, there's the highest total we'd ever be in debt for, $1,525,000. So this, to me, makes sense that we have flexibility in stopping this program whenever we want. If things aren't working out and another administration wants to get out of it, we can. In the meantime, we're fixing the streets. So then we go over here to the streets, and this is where I had my cohorts, Todd and Wayne, and I'm not getting, come on up here a minute, will you? The Y'all know Todd Lensing, the street foreman?
Yeah.
Lifelong Herman resident. Anyway, we talked to Todd. Just stay up here a minute. Chief watching back there, he tries to get out. We talked about all the streets and we talked about priorities, and the first thing we did was we looked at high traffic streets, and actually I think everybody kind of knows the main thoroughfares we use for east and west and north and south. It's 6th Street and some of 4th Street, probably going west, east to west, and then north and south is going to be Gutenberg, Jefferson and Washington Streets. So we identified those as the high traffic areas, and then we had to think, well, what's underneath those streets? So we did the water main. We looked at the water mains underneath the streets, and we did this last time also, but there's nothing worse than a freshly paved street and a backhoe and they're digging up the water line because it's old and needs to be replaced, so we're not going to do that. We have a couple of blocks around the elementary school for the next budget year to be replaced, the water line to be replaced, and that will get paved right after that. We have several streets, let me look at the priorities here. We have several streets on the west end that don't have any utilities in them, so those we'll have to do core samples. We're going to do core samples probably anywhere from 3 to 6 per block to see what's under the street, because we have to have good base, right, Todd? And that's another good thing about this. If we do this and we get the core samples and we see that we got to dig these streets down, it takes more time, it takes more money, but we're going to do it right. So then when they're paved this time, they should last longer. Plus, when it comes time to fix them, all we got to do is repave them. We know what's under them. That's been taken care of. So I think that's a good part of this plan. Let's see. Now the rest of these purple lines here are streets that we know where we have old cast iron water mains, and you've probably seen us out there in the streets digging up the water line. Gellert Street, Washington Street, which is a main thoroughfare as far as I'm concerned, has a lot of old cast iron. Jefferson's the same way. So we're going to have to, as we do some of these streets, we do core samples and do engineering and get bid specs out for some of these streets that we know we can do relatively easily. We'll be working on the water mains so that when these streets are done, we can move over to these streets. That's kind of the plan. It's going to be a little touch and go because it takes longer to get water main in than it does to pave a street. But several years ago, remember, we raised the water rates, I'm sure you remember that, so that we could, what's that face for, Myron? Nothing, I'm just kidding.
You guys are bankrupting me.
Anyway.
And I ain't afraid to say it either.
Yeah, I know. We raised the rates so that we could start replacing water main. Instead of a bond issue for the water main, we wanted a pay-as-you-go type program so that we could have enough money in the budget to replace 2 or 3 blocks of water main every year. And I think so far we're going to get to that. It just seems like it takes time for engineering and all those things that go with it. And timing's an issue also. But I want Todd to talk a little bit about what he's dealing with now with his budget and how he does the streets and how frustrating it is for him.
Like I said, my name's Todd Lindsay. I'm a lifelong Herman resident. I've been with the city about 22 years, I guess, on and off. And Wayne and Mark asked me about 4.5 years ago if I'd be interested in being in charge of the street department. I thought, well, sure, I'll take a stab at it. Well, you learn a lot. And when we work on these streets, you'll find that you don't have much asphalt. You've got a lot of chip and seal, things like that. But I'm sure you've seen the alligator cracking in areas. Well, when cars drive over that and it gets wet, that makes it worse. So I realized 4.5 years ago the little amount of money that we had to work with. So I started working with a company out of Illinois called CAM Industries. And what we did is we sealed quite a few streets in town. Now, by no means was that a permanent fix, but we did that to try and buy us time, basically. So we could get some money to fix some of these streets the proper way. Like Mark said, you know, when you drive down a street, you look at a street and say, wow, this street's really bad. but you really don't know what's underneath it. You know, you might have a bad water line, you may not have any base, and as Mark said, you know, you've got curb and gutters that have to be replaced, and it's just not feasible to redo a street without curb and gutter, new water line, things like that. We're just going backwards is what we're doing. And I've got some figures here that I can't remember all this in my head, but I made a few notes. We have line item half cent 43.55, which is everything in our line item is for what goes down in the street, like cold mix, hot mix, rock, concrete, things of that nature. Last 4 years, as Mark stated, around $120,000 in this line item. This can only be used to put stuff down on the streets. We have other things in half cent, but you have things like salt, cinders, gas, stormwater improvements, okay? But you can't apply that to the streets. So that's where our line item half cent 43.55 is so important to have money to do our streets.
That's a half-cent sales tax.
It's a half-cent sales tax, yes. One block, a city block 640 feet long, most of the streets are 28 to 30 feet wide. Okay, that's 2,133 square yards. Just to mill and overlay, now that's not doing anything to the infrastructure underneath, that's not touching the water lines, that's not touching the curb and gutter, is going to cost you about $36,000. And you hope that it holds out for maybe 10 years. You know, we've got buses in town, we've got trash trucks that are really heavy. You know, and that's where if you had proper base on the streets, this wouldn't be such an issue. About $50,000 a block for curb and gutter, if the curb and gutters are bad. A street is designed concave so the water runs off and it runs to the gutters. A lot of our streets are flat. They don't have a dome. But when they get to the curb and gutter, if the curb and gutter is no good, you're defeating your purpose. So, you know, you're looking at probably, in essence, if you're going to do curb and gutter and an overlay and everything, you're looking about $125,000 per block. And that gets pretty expensive. And that's why we're talking about this bond issue tonight. This one here is, when you open up and look at this, in this color right here are the streets that we have done in the last 5 years. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to pick streets where the curb and gutter was pretty decent, where we thought we had base, and where we thought we had pretty good water lines. Well, I'll be honest with you, we're running out of those. We've done about all we can do until we get more money. The yellow areas are the first phase that we would like to tackle, and the purple area is a state highway. The CAM industry thing, it works best when you have a new street. We put it on our streets hoping to get 5 or 7 years out of it. Whenever you have a new street and they come in and they seal your street off, I'm going to use a facsimile. If you've got a hole in your roof and you don't have the money to fix it, the proper way, like putting a new roof on, you'll probably just patch that spot, okay, to keep your floor from going bad or something like that. Well, that's what happens to a street. Every time you take a street and you make a cut in it, that's a potential place for water to get in, ice, everything like that. That's what causes streets to raise and everything else. So that's what we're asking for. We're asking for the bond because we think that, and I know for a fact Herman's a great place to live. I've lived here all my life. But I think it'd be better for the generations behind us. And as Mark stated, as we do this phase, the first phase, you know, we won't be doing all the streets at one time. Hopefully we can afford to do some of these down the road where all we can do is just overlay them. You know, we won't have to worry about the base underneath or anything like that. But, you know, just keeping the water out of them, that's your main thing right now on your streets.
Todd, you mentioned curb and gutter was $50,000 a block.
Yeah, about $50,000 a block.
And the overlay, a mill and an overlay was
36 and a half, something like that.
You said that was 125. What you forgot to mention was 125 is a full depth.
Full depth reclamation, yes.
And explain that to them.
Well, full depth is when they come in and they put down 10 inches of base rock.
First they have to dig it out.
Yeah, they got to dig it out first, and they got to have somewhere to go with it. But they do 10 inches of base rock, and then they'll come in and they'll put down 3 inches of asphalt on top of it. So that's you know,
That's about
providing there's a good water line there first.
That's about $125,000.
About $125,000.
Who's they?
Whoever we
Whoever the
get.
contractors are, yeah. And everybody says, you know, well, why doesn't your street department do it? Well, I've got a crew of 4 guys and 1 truck. And we do a lot of other things besides street work. And it would take us forever. And if I tore your street down, you'd be so mad at me after about a month and a half. Because that, you know, we're looking at, you know, weather and everything else, you know, breakdowns with our equipment. So contractor can come in 1 or 2 days, in, out, and you're done. You know, so a lot of people ask why, but contractors actually save you a lot of money. You know,
They have the equipment, they have the manpower.
your
That's what
street
they do.
department is basically a maintenance department, but we've gotten to the point now that our streets in some areas are so bad that it's a rebuilding department is what it is, and it's time for them to be rebuilt.
What is the time frame of phase 1
Phase 1 is 8 years,
8 years, yeah.
give or take. Yeah.
to finance periods?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I was also going to mention, you may have seen Todd's crews out a couple of places. They were up on Stone Hill Highway, they were over on 7th, digging up the street because they dug up a patch of asphalt and there was mud underneath it. And I live on a gravel road, so I know what happens when the frost comes up and you start running through that mushy stuff. It's what was happening up on those streets, so they would dig out some of those really bad areas, put the base in, and then a little overlay to keep that from getting any worse. But that's the kind of streets we're talking about, where there's absolutely no base and the asphalt's sitting on mud.
And you know, right now, you're going to see a lot more of that because this is about the wettest winter that I've ever seen in a long time. It's terrible. You can't even walk across your yard right now. So, you know, when the streets get soft and wet like that too, and big trucks drive over them and there's no base underneath, it's not good. Any other questions?
When you actually start, got the contract, whatever, you start a street, is that after you do those core samples?
Yeah.
And so then the contractor is going to take that information to decide
Right.
what type of street or how far or whatever, right? So
Yeah. And I can tell you that in the last 4.5 years, the majority of the streets, and I'm talking 80%, don't have any base under them.
so it's kind of a given.
It's yeah.
Well,
You see,
then,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, once then the streets starts, then does the whole, does you go block by block, or if there's several blocks involved, do they take out that whole area, or?
They'll probably work block by block for first, yeah, do 1 block at a time, tear that street down and redo it, yeah.
Well, and I noticed Schiller, which I'm kind of interested in, and that goes from 1st or from Wharf to 5th, and so that's a long stretch, which is an important street, so
Yep.
they would just be doing a block at a time to, traffic-wise, I'm thinking.
Yeah, yeah. More than likely, I don't know what their time frame would be, but
They're just doing it on weekends in October.
yeah. Maybe during my fest, but we probably.
That's
But
the problem.
yeah. But you know, there's some spots in town that don't need curb and gutter. We're not going to take any curb and gutter out that's not in need to be taken out. You know, we want to try to save as much money as we can. But like I say, just drive street by street, the curb and gutter. You know, Wayne and I, we went over the whole town and wrote down every street that needed curb and gutter. Just about every street needs it in some spot or another.
And you measured it.
Yeah, we measured everything, yeah.
You remember what the total was? Was it?
I don't remember what the footage was, but it was like $1.3 million just for curb and gutter. And that's about anywhere from $35 to $38 a running foot, yeah.
We did some core sampling in the past, and there's a lot of areas in town where Todd mentioned that there's a layer of asphalt, a layer of chip and seal, a layer of asphalt, a layer of chip and seal, a layer of asphalt, a layer of asphalt. It's they call it striping, and there's really nothing there but old asphalt. So it looks good until you start running over
And
it.
water gets between it, and that's what makes it so saturated.
Jim, you had a question?
Yeah, do sidewalks play into this at all? We've got some awful sidewalks.
We do, and not at this time. We're going to try to prioritize the streets at first. We will be looking at grants and other ways to fund sidewalk repair. I understand that's a priority for some people, I understand that. But we've done a lot with the TAP grant for the Safe Routes to School. We've also done the DREAM initiative several years ago that got a lot of the downtown sidewalks done. And then also the other TAP grant for the Schiller area and some of the downtown. So we'll still look at that. There's still more grants available for those types of projects.
Yeah.
Mark, what about the alleyways? They're really in horrible shape downtown.
Yeah, I tell you, anytime I do an alley, I kind of dodge bullets right now because people want the streets done first. I know the alleys are bad. Alleys are a little different than streets. Streets, you know, you're going to have a concave effect. Alleys will have to have this effect. You want your water to run down the middle because if you don't, there's no curb and gutters in alleys. Water will all go into the yards.
And that's basically where the trash trucks go.
Trash trucks,
and it's
yeah.
awfully tough to keep that asphalt looking good.
Yeah, your water's actually going down the tracks that the trash trucks have smashed down now. But yeah, you know, alleys are a problem. I'm not going to stand here and say they're not, but I would rather see streets done before alleys. And like I say, the 120 that we're talking about that I get every year for the streets. 30,000 of that I usually try to set aside for in-house projects, and that's stuff that we do on our own. Like we just recently completed some stuff in Seatown last year. And I know that's not a lot, but we have been patching some alleys too. You know, we have to, so we can't let them get that bad. Byron.
I got a couple things.
Okay.
One, how does a 18-wheeler in full loaded compared to the trash truck?
I don't know what the weight factor is there. I couldn't tell you that.
That's a good question. We'll find out though. That is a good
Because,
question.
I mean,
Yeah.
every time I talk about 18-wheelers coming down the streets, everybody said, oh, it's the trash trucks creating the problem. You know, but
Yeah.
in front of my house, we got 18-wheelers coming down through there that don't belong in that neighborhood. You know, they're you know, I guess it's the guidance system that they run.
Oh yeah, the GPS.
They pull them
sure.
down that street quite often, and you know, I blame the trucks because these guys,
Yeah,
when they come in,
we've run into a few problems with this with the flood routes. A lot of them can't speak English either. There's a lot of foreign truck drivers. I'm not saying that to be funny, but I saw the same guy get stuck twice 2 years in a row in the same spot.
Right.
So,
Okay.
you know, and it's a bilingual thing. You know, they have a hard time.
Okay, and then on this plan of doing this, what, every, say, 8 years it is?
4 years.
Every 4 years, okay? Now, the first round out, we got an increase in taxes. Now, what happens on the second time we do it? Does the taxes go up more?
No.
Okay.
The tax levy stays the same through the whole thing.
Through the whole thing?
Yes, sir.
Because has anybody done any kind of analysis or study as to how many residents in this town are seniors on fixed incomes compared to other things?
I know we don't know how many, but I know it could be a burden on some people. We understand that. Yep.
Yeah, it's you know, if it doesn't pass, we'll go back to what we're doing. I mean, which, you know, isn't the proper way to do things. I'm not going to stand here and lie to you. That's not, you know, we'll just have to keep patching and patching and patching. It's just not enough money there. You know, I'm not going to sit here and make promises to you that I can't keep because, you know, we've got our backs to the wall now with no money. And, you know, the CRF process that I started sealing the streets, the first year that I took over, I had looked in the last budget, there was like $35,000 alone used for cold mix just to patch potholes. With this CRF program, I have cut that down to half. So not only does it cut the buying of cold mix down, which doesn't last. Cold mix is just to patch potholes. It's not like hot mix, you know, where you can use it. Cold mix is when you see a pothole, you patch it so somebody doesn't make it bigger. But, you know, it has cut that considerably, and man hours, just having guys go out and patch potholes. By no means is it a perfect fix. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it is, because it's not. The guys from KM Industries have told me they work all over the nation. Our streets are some of the worst they've ever seen. And when you're putting it on our streets, naturally you're not going to get the life out of that product that you would get out of a new street. So, yeah.
How confident are you that the city can repay these bonds every 4 years? I mean, is that something that is going to depend on the local Herman economy? It'll depend on individuals buying a house?
I'll let Joey answer that one, if you don't mind, Joey.
Oh, no, it shouldn't be a problem, is the short answer. It's secured by the property taxes. And so, in effect, it's secured by all of the property in town. So it is not economy dependent. And 80,000 tons is what a 18-wheeler hauls, and a garbage truck hauls between 14 and 16,000. So it is the 18-wheelers that crunch things.
Little bonus. Thanks, Joey.
Useless information. Oh, here's you guys are going to get great new streets if you vote this. What I'm most proud of is the money chart. And because, so what happens is you come out and if you guys vote yes, you issue approximately, in this case, it looks like it's $1,030,000. And you basically more than triple your budget for your streets. If you're doing $120,000 in streets now, you're doing 8 times that much, a little more than 8 times that much. And so you issue the bonds, and then you do the work over a 3-year period. In the 4th year, you're still paying back your bonds, but in the 4th year, you plan on the next phase, or you re-examine it. But you can stop right there. You can say, hey, we blew it. We messed up. Or you can continue and say, this is a great idea. And so you go year 5, you issue, in this case, it's $1,000,001. Your levy stays about the same, the 65 cents we're talking about the same. And you and you start the process over. You re-examine, you build out for the next 3 years, and then year 4 you examine it again, and you say, okay, this is working or it's not working. And maybe you have an entire administration change, and they say, you know what, we don't want to do any more bonds. You can eliminate them. It takes your taxes go away, and you can do something else. And so you always have that option. There, in fact, at no point in here, even year 2, you can say, hey, we're not going to do it in year 4. You always have the option. The other way of doing bonds, and the way most people do bonds, is that year 1, they'll say, okay, we're going to do a street bond for 20 years. And you issue all your bonds, and what happens? Well, first of all, in year 10, all those streets that you fixed in year 1 and 2 are gone. And so you're still paying on a bond issue. And so in this way, you're always re-examining the process and the projects. Are we doing it right? Do we have enough money? Is this the right way to do it? And so you always have the option to end it tomorrow, but you always have the option to continue. In year 20, we have year 21. In year 20 or 21, you say, we've got a few dollars remaining in authorization. Think of your bonds as a debit card. You have permission to issue that much debt. And so all the way out, you go through this, and all the way out in the last year, you've got $545,000 in authorized bonds, but not issued. And you say, do we want to continue with this process? Hopefully, if this has worked, by the time this year rolls around, it'll be an easy pass. You'll go back to the people and say, hey, we're going to do this for another 20 years. We're not going to be hitting you every 5 years saying, hey, let's redo the streets, let's redo the streets. You vote it once, and every year you reevaluate. Is this working for us? In year 20, then in year 20, they have to come back to you and say, let's do it again. So that's the process, sorry.
But we don't go back every 5 years now.
No. You pass this one bond issue, and you issue the bonds in a planned method. So in the first portion, $1,030,000, $1,001,000 in year 4, $1,002,000 in year 8, in year 12, $1,003,000. Now remember, when I say you issue $1,003,000, you've already paid off whatever it was the year before, $1,002,000. This does another thing that nobody gets excited about but me, is that by issuing it in 4-year tranches, the interest rate is as low as you can get. It is when you're only borrowing for a short amount of time, that means there's no risk to the investor. And so there's no, they don't demand a premium that if you issued a 20-year bond, and then they come back and say, hey, well, we need at least a 4.5% or something like that. On this, I'm thinking it's going to be under 3, and it's going to be closer to 2.5% in cost. And so if you think about a 3% borrow, if you think inflation right now is 3%, you're borrowing money cheaper than it's costing you. You're paying back dollars that are worth less.
Is that a fixed rate?
It will be, every time we do it, it'll be a fixed rate. But let me point out, I've heard interest rates can go up and down. In year 1, that's fixed. The rates changes in year 4. It's all market dependent. The beauty of this is that in my lifetime of being in the business for the last 33 years, interest rates in 1 to 5 years are always the less expensive. It's always inexpensive. Even remember the days when you had 15% treasury bonds? This was, well, you don't remember, but I do. That was when I just got in the business, in the 70s and 80s. You had high interest rates. Well, even the 5-year interest rates, if you were 20 years, you'd be at 8 and 9%. Well, right now, even then, you were at 3 and 4 and 5%. So it's substantially less to keep it short. And there's a huge demand for short-term bonds. And so they should be easy to sell as well. Yes, sir.
We all know that every year that passes, prices go up. And I can't see the numbers on the left side of that chart, but I can see that those lines keep increasing. So how does those lines, the first year out of each section, they're going up, and we know that products go up, labor goes up, what have you. How is it that we get by not increasing taxes each time that these things rise even higher?
You're exactly right. And for you that didn't get it, you're basically saying everything, you've got inflation. How do we deal with inflation? Well, because everything's based on property values, inflation affects your property values as well. So as your property values rise, the levy stays the same because it's going to bring in more money. And so basically, it brings in more money, and then the cost, let's say you're $1,030,000, it would not surprise me that in year 16, $1,030,000 tomorrow buys the same thing as $1,400,000 in year 16. Would it surprise anybody? I mean, that's a small amount, 2% inflation or 3% inflation. So you're going to get about the same project. Even though it's costing in year 1 it costs $1 million, in year 16 it costs $1.4 million, and so it's planned into that.
I have a question. Why did we decide to go with this amount instead of going with maybe half the amount that our older people could afford better? It would just take longer. Is that correct?
Well, it's a good question. Let's say that we just went with, instead of the amount being asked is $8 million. What we're doing is we're issuing $1 million. So you don't pay on the $8 million. You issue only on the bonds outstanding. So we're doing exactly what you're saying. How do we do it at least expensive way? Well, $1 million in bonds is about the least expensive way you could do it to do your streets. And so you're only always borrowing about $1 million in bonds. You only have $1 million in bonds here, outstanding. You only have borrowed $1 million here, and as the chart says, you will never have more than $1.5 million outstanding. And so that's about as least expensive way as you can do what you're asking. You're saying, how do we keep it down? This is how you keep it down to as low a level as possible. And I know there was a question. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
I know there's a question back there.
Yeah. What is the cost of each bond sales that we have to do over 4 years? What's the cost of that?
I'm going to guess, I would guess 3% total costs. It's a great question. What I will try to do is do
That'd be 3% on the 1 million.
That's right. That's right. And what I'll try to do is limit that. And by the way I do that is with something called a private placement or a direct placement. If I can get a direct placement, it would cost a third of that amount. Those have become very popular, and what I do is I'll take the block and then I will go to several institutions and I'll ask them to bid for just this 4-year block. If I can do that, then I get rid of, my legal expenses are down, my offering document prices are non-existent, and so we can get it down. But you don't want to plan for a really inexpensive way. I'm planning for it to be a normal cost.
This is in the for whatever it's worth category. There's various websites that have all sorts of information about all sorts of little towns. And I don't know for all of those, but for the bigger cities like Owensville and Montgomery and us, and there was one other one up there, Montgomery. The percentage of people over the age of 65 is roughly the same in all of them.
It really is. So your communities are all the same. You actually have more vibrancy than most of those communities listed. You drive through town, you kind of get it. It's a pretty cool place.
Yeah, we're better off.
Yeah. Your taxes are remarkably low as well. And Gasconade, I believe, issued a water and sewer revenue bond as a general obligation bond. They issued water and sewer bonds as a GO. I think that's why that's so high. They're an awfully small town, and so this kind of answers your question. It's the most secure and easiest to pay back type of debt, and so that's probably the only way they could have gotten their bonds sold is by issuing that kind of debt. And that's why they're kind of really high.
Thank you, Joey.
Kevin, you had a question? No, you answered. Okay.
Mark, you might want to wrap up the questions and then let everybody come forward.
Sure.
And look in detail at the maps and charts, and we'll be here available to answer any other questions.
If there's no other questions, please. Oh, there's one, Dolores.
I do have one. Are the bottom of the payment schedule there, is that the same that was in the paper? Is that?
I believe it is, yeah. Could be.
Because I thought you had 470,000 left at the end of the.
Oh, it could have been. I've changed it so many times that I came in, the first thing I did is I redid my numbers to match that. Depending on interest rate I use, depending on how many bonds are at front, this is the one I believe I started with, but I know when the mayor asked, I sent him one and I looked at one, it's a different number.
So I can get that from Trish, you have a copy of that information?
And this is, hopefully, this is going to change. Not too terribly much. Your levy's going to stay right at that 65-cent level. But next year, assuming this passes or in the spring, we'll look at it and say, okay, can we borrow $1,030,000? Can we borrow $1,040,000? Should we borrow $1,002,000? And so it's going to fluctuate a little bit. What you can kind of think is that the goal